Hi everyone, welcome back. Today we're on Chapter 4, Laws, Rules, and Regulations. We will be beginning on page 31 of Ethics for Massage Therapists. So in almost every walk of life, laws, rules, and regulations affect how we act. Laws ranging from guidelines for duties such as paying taxes to protecting us from injury, violence, and damage to our personal belongings affect everyone. Laws and regulations are rules that governing bodies have determined people must follow. In most cases, the government body also states consequences for people who do not obey the laws. The laws are enacted not only to protect the public from harm, but also to keep agencies and governing bodies running smoothly and with accountability. Accountability is just showing the responsibility or proof of performing a task or duty. In this chapter, we talk about the importance of laws, rules, and regulations, how they affect your massage practice, and how ethical behavior involves working within laws, and regulations. So first up we have is laws. So who makes the laws? What are the laws? Laws are passed to protect the public, to keep governing bodies running effectively, and to set guidelines for appropriate behavior. Almost all countries have some structure of laws that states what behaviors are acceptable and what is not. Each level of government establishes rules of conduct for a defined population. Our national governing body is the U.S. Congress, the legislature, which is a branch of the federal government. We elect the representatives and senators to serve in Congress. They create the laws for the entire nation for matters on taxes, the environment, criminal acts, business operations. Federal laws and regulations apply to everyone within the United States. At the state level, we also elect officials who serve in a state legislature. The laws and regulations created by this body affect people living only within that specific state. The state legislature passes laws, for example, that may give people in that state additional protections beyond those in the federal law. A state cannot pass a law that is contradictory to the federal law, however. It gives the example if U.S. Congress passes a law making it illegal to dump certain chemicals in any river, a state cannot override that law to authorize the dumping in a state. In some instances, the federal government may set certain general guidelines for the entire nation, but allow states to determine guidelines for that state. Setting the speed limits for highways is an example of that. The maximum of all federal highways the maximum speed limit is 65 to 70 an hour for all federal highways, but a state can set lower speed limit in areas it deems dangerous. Currently, no national laws govern the practice of massage and body work. Although it might seem beneficial to have consistent laws, rules, and regulations that apply to all therapists in all locations, there is no present movement towards this goal. The National Certification Exam is currently accepted as the test for licensure in many states. Now, actually, they've changed that, and I didn't realize that was out of date in this textbook. But actually, now you do the National Certification Exam is your exam is called MBLEX, and it sets as your baseline standard. And then after you've passed your MBLEX, you've received your license from your state. Then you go and you practice massage for 6 months. Then you're allowed to go and do the national certification through the National Certification Board of Therapeutic Massage and Body Workers, the NCBTMB. Let's see back. Not all states require licensure for massage and body work. Regulations are relationship of law and ethics. Laws and ethics are closely related but are not the same thing, as we talked about earlier in the other chapters. Many laws are based on ethical principles. It gives examples unethical to hurt someone, and laws also make it a criminal act and apply some form of punishment. When a law is broken, the police or the court system take action against the offender. With a civil offense, individuals may file lawsuits against others who they have or feel have wronged them. When an ethical offense occurs, however, it may be a professional association that takes action against the offender. It gives the example: a client feels unfairly treated by a therapist. They can file a complaint with the association, which then determines if indeed an unethical act has occurred, and if so, what should be done. Laws at the national and local levels cover many actions and behaviors, but they cannot cover every possible aspect of what is right or wrong. It talks about the unscrupulous people always trying to bend the law and to find loopholes. Law also changes to reflect current beliefs and issues. As an example, in the early to mid 2000s, our society has emphasized business law and ethics. Many criminal and civil proceedings involve corporations and their owners or directors. Massage therapists should accept the responsibility to know both the laws and the ethical codes that apply to their profession. So who makes the laws? Laws, ordinances, rules, and regulations are all created at various levels of the government. Citizens must follow all federal and state laws as well as local ordinances. State laws generally have similarities and differences from state to state. For the practice of massage and body work, 33 states now have some form of regulations. Most of these states define criteria for license to practice, such as a certain number of hours of massage training, and many require certification examination. In addition, most create a board to oversee the practice and the profession within the state. Other states' local or county regulations often apply to therapists, and it's the responsibility to us as the therapist to become educated about what local, county, and state regulations apply to our practice. So here I want you to contact the Tuscaloosa, I just went blank. Contact the city of Tuscaloosa in order to find out what our laws and regulations are as far as to the benefits of us as massage therapists. I want you to write in as one of your exercises. I want you to write down the specific laws, rules, or regulations that pertain to us here in the Tuscaloosa area or whatever your county is. So if you're from, if you're going to be practicing in Winston County, or if you live in Winston County, or if you live in Jefferson County, I want you to do it based on that county. If you live here in Tuscaloosa, I want you to do it based on Tuscaloosa County. So I said that states differ in other regulatory matters, such as the number of hours of training required, the type of examination used, and the makeup of the board that regulates the profession, as well as the cost of licensure. Here in the state of Alabama, we're required to do 650 hours of education. We are required to take the NBLEX exam, and then ultimately you can go back and take the national certification exam. And then cost of licensure here is I believe it's $195 to take NBLEX. And then once you pass the NBLEX, then you will send I can't remember if it's $125. I believe it's $125 to the massage therapy board, but it's actually a total of $150 because you send in $25 to the massage board to get your application packet for the massage and the packet will come to you. You take it, you send off for it before you take your NBLEX. Once you get your packet, you sign up, you take your NBLEX. Once you pass your NBLEX, you send everything in your packet along with the required information back to the state with another $125, which makes it a total of $150 to get your license here in the state of Alabama. Also, you will be required to have your own malpractice insurance. While you're in school, you're covered through AMTA's insurance policy for malpractice for students. Once you graduate, before you can get your license through the state, you will have to purchase your own separate malpractice insurance, and it can range anywhere. I believe the lowest I've seen is $105 for a year, up to I think about $260 is the most I've ever seen and that's for at least $1 million coverage worth of malpractice insurance. So we get off very easily or very light on our malpractice insurance compared to some of the professions. Okay, so back to page 33. Often local ordinances also regulate the practice of massage. Some community ordinances have education requirements for therapists. Some require background checks and health examinations. And some regulate geographical areas where a practice can or cannot be located. Like here in Tuscaloosa, the school's actually in a area that's deemed both residential and commercial. We have a dual zone here. Some areas are deemed just business, meaning you cannot live there in that area. And some are just residential, meaning you can only live there, you cannot have a business there. So it's important also when you're doing your research, make sure you know what area you're in, what your zone is for your specific area. Moving on, you need to know all laws and regulations pertaining to your location. You will learn your own state's requirements during your massage training, but if you're considering practicing in another state, you need to contact that state's officials to learn its requirements for massage practice. And I can help you with that if you need to, or you can just do a Google search and find out how to contact whichever potential state's governing board for massage. It's important to know when it comes to laws, the statement of "I didn't know" does not cut it. That will not get you out of trouble if you find yourself breaking a law or having a violation of any sort. I don't know, or I didn't know that was a law, or I didn't know that was the case. That's not a legal defense. So don't even try it with that one. Next up, it's talking about process of making laws. Down at the bottom of 33. So in the U.S., at the national level, the government has 3 primary branches, and this is not going to be a history course, so we don't go in depth into this, but just briefly, you have the legislative, the executive, and the judicial branches. Congress is the legislative branch that, in keeping with the Constitution, passes legislation for laws and regulations. A Congress consists of senators and representatives elected to serve in Congress. The executive branch also consists of elected officials, led and directed by the president. And then the judicial branch consists of the federal court system, in which federal judges are appointed by the executive branch and confirmed by the legislative branch. The Constitution designed this system of checks and balances to prevent any one branch of government from having too much power. So everyone tends to be really harsh on our presidents, but our system is actually set up so that the president alone cannot make any real decisions. It takes a balance of the 3 different branches to be able to affect any laws or ordinances or anything of that sort. Also note that it states all branches of government, all three of the branches, are subject to the principles of the Constitution. So everything ultimately goes back to the Constitution. So in general, laws are created because a need is shown for some type of regulation. Interested parties, agencies, or legislators assert that some regulation is needed for a particular behavior or practice for that regulation of a professional group. It gives the example of healthcare for elderly being a major concern for today. Legislatures are looking for ways to make healthcare more affordable for the elderly, and many states are considering to reduce the cost of prescriptions, medical treatments, and nursing care. It goes on with special interest groups for the elderly. You can read through all that. You don't need me to do it for you. Then it says, once a senator or representative decides to propose a new law, the process begins. The proposed legislation, called a bill, is first written. In most cases, it requires study and research and possibly many months of writing and rewriting. Different interested parties often work together during this process to produce a final version of the bill, which is then presented to legislature. The next step is for legislature to consider the bill. The bill is introduced, is given a number, and is usually referred to a committee. A bill concerning massage and bodywork may be referred to a professional licensing, and regulation committee, or to a healthcare committee. Each state has its own system of committees. Another group or individual can affect the legislative process at this point. These are where our lobbyists come in. A lobbyist is employed by an interested party or business. They meet with the committee chair or other legislators to convince them of a need for passing the bill. At the same time, a lobbyist from another group opposed to the bill may be trying to convince the committee to drop the bill. The lobbyists can be hired by any group with an interest in the outcome of the legislation. While a committee is considering a bill, it may hold hearings. Public hearing, anyone with interest in a bill can make a presentation to the committee to argue for or against a bill. Once a bill is final, if the committee decides to bring it to the full Senate or House of Representatives, the bill then passes to that legislative body for discussion and a vote. At this stage, media often reports on legislative debates about the bills that involve some controversy. If the bill passes the first legislative body, it then goes to the other body. If it passes through the House of Representatives, then it goes to the Senate, and in the Senate, it's assigned to another committee. If it makes it through all this process again, then it will go on to the next group. If changes are made to the bill while it is in the second house, it may be sent to the committee made up of legislators from both houses, called the Conference or Census Committee. Once a bill passes through both chambers without additional changes, it then goes to the governor to be signed into law. The governor has a right to veto the law. Legislator may or may not attempt to override the veto with another vote. If the governor assigns a bill or legislator overrides a veto, the bill becomes law. Listed below are examples of laws governing massage therapy. Okay, in the state of Missouri, it requires a minimum of 500 hours of training. This includes instructors who have been approved by the State Board of Therapeutic Massage. Florida law states a license can be denied or disciplinary action can be taken for fraudulent representation in the practice of massage. And it says some states require all massage therapists have a continuing education hours for licensure renewal. And again, Alabama requires 16. If you have the national certification, or if you're going to go for the national certification, it is 24 hours every 2 years. So you want to think about your goal needs to be at least 12 hours every year of continuing education. And of that total 24 hours, 6 hours now is required to be just of ethics. So it's something to consider when you're looking for your continuing eds, that you do have a minimum number of ethics required. Okay, so on the local, city, or county level, governing bodies establish regulations, generally called ordinances. An ordinance adds to the existing federal and state laws to meet the specific needs of the community. Gives the example, a business license is required in most communities. It is here in Tuscaloosa, the state of Alabama. Local ordinances may also require a building inspection, which Tuscaloosa does, business applications, and business fee to open a business, which Tuscaloosa does. Elected officials at the local level may be called city councilors, aldermen, or selectmen. They perform in much the same way as legislative officials do at the state and national levels. They're just focused more on the local level. Interested party who sees a need for guidelines brings proposal before the city council or the board. Local requirements for massage therapists, like state regulations, can be quite diverse. In some communities, old ordinances and regulations can hamper massage therapists today. Many of these ordinances were enacted to restrict massage parlors. For example, in some cities, it's illegal to operate a massage business within 500 feet of a school, a church, or a bar. Many massage therapists have worked to help update such outdated regulations. Listed below are some examples of local ordinances that still affect massage and body work. So it gives any person engaged in the practice of massage must submit to a background check for a criminal record. And does that. Sorry, we lost our page here. Any person wishing to practice massage within city limits must undergo a health examination by a licensed doctor. We do not have that in effect here in Tuscaloosa or in Alabama as far as I know, but definitely not in the city of Tuscaloosa. A massage therapy practice must keep a log of all clients for a minimum of 2 years. I would definitely fall back to that. You want to keep a record of your clients for at least 2 years. A window must be present in any massage room. That's not a regulation here in Tuscaloosa, but just note that is, if you do have that is a city ordinance. That is one of your test questions, hint, hint. A person wanting to practice massage must undergo a check for sexually transmitted diseases. That is not in effect here in Alabama, and is absolutely absurd. That kind of links us back to the days of prostitution being titled massage therapy. Okay, so do your exercise 4-1, and again, I would do that on Word or whatever so that you can do all exercises for this chapter together and forward it on to me as an email attachment. Okay, enforcement of laws. We are still on this one PowerPoint. Wow. These PowerPoints are made up by the authors of the book, the publishing company, not by me. So it does, each one kind of has its own criteria. Okay, so enforcement of laws. Once a law is passed and it's on the books, that law must be enforced. The law itself specifies who is to enforce it. For example, criminal laws are enforced by the police and the court system, which act upon violations of that law. People who break the laws are arrested and brought before a court to determine if they are guilty or innocent and what the appropriate punishment should be. Key points. Most laws are made to protect the public. Currently, laws, rules, and regulations affecting massage and body work are passed and enforced at the state and local levels, not the national level. And it is important to know what rules apply to you in your practice. Okay, so read your case study there, and then we will move on with rules and regulations. Okay, so when a new rule is enacted, the governing body may set up a state board to oversee that law. In many states, the board is appointed by the governor. The board generally has 5 to 10 members, most from the profession involved, but many states also appoint members of the public or someone from a related field. For example, some states require that a nurse or a chiropractor sit on the state board of massage. The board's goal is to make the law work in particular ways for the profession. This requires a set of rules and regulations, often called the rules and regs. The rules and regs expand on the law itself, including explanations for how practitioners should do what the law requires. Again, this is a system of checks and balances. In most states, once rules are written, a public hearing is held to allow practitioners and the general public to respond to the proposed rules. After the public hearing, the board may rewrite the rules and regulations as needed to work more efficiently. Rules and regs are important to help delineate the law. Most laws involve general principles and contain general language that may seem vague in certain areas. Another example is clarification of the exact amount of training needed for licensure. The law may state 500 hours of training is required. The rules may further state that certain numbers of hours are required in certain categories, such as anatomy, physiology, kinesiology, theory and techniques, pathology, ethics, health and safety issues, and CPR. Why rules and regulations are necessary is our next topic. So rules and regulations are simply extensions of the law intended to guide those affected by the law in practical applications. The rules and regs help to guide a person in the specifics of what is acceptable and unacceptable in their practice. Rules are there for those whom they affect. They protect both the public and the therapist from harm with clear-cut guidelines. Gives the example of a client filing a complaint against a therapist about insufficient draping, and the state regulations clearly define that minimal draping should be. The state board can then work with the therapist to use draping practices that are appropriate for clients. If regulations do not clarify the specifics of required draping, board members would then have to determine if what they felt was appropriate. In the state of Alabama, draping is mandatory. In this school, draping is mandatory. And for school purposes, we drape a man the exact same way we drape a woman. Just as we would not expose a female's breasts, we do not expose male breasts. That's just our rule here at the school. Once you're out and on your own, you need to check with the state laws and regulations regarding draping. But again, draping is mandatory. The genitals have to be draped at all times. Females' breasts have to be draped at all times. And with the population going more, less gender specific, where we're having restrooms that are male-female now, I feel like for your safety, I would enforce just a standard draping. I would drape the men exactly as I drape the women. Just as I would not expose female breasts, I would never expose male breasts. If you offer females an additional breast drape, if you're doing abdominal work, which we do, you have to offer it to the males also. And it is mandatory to drape the breast. Therefore, we will always offer everyone additional draping when we do abdominal work. And when we get into our hands-on portion, you will be doing practicing lots of draping techniques before you ever start working on the public. So you will be confident with your draping skills. But with that being said, accidents do happen. And whenever an accident does happen, whenever someone is accidentally exposed, or draping malfunctions, or whatever the situation is, you always acknowledge it. You always ask the client, or apologize to the client first and foremost, and you always ask the client if they feel comfortable with continuing the massage session. Now let's get back to our textbook. From an ethical viewpoint, rules and regulations help prevent ethical questions and situations from arising in the first place. And then it goes in, it gives another example of regulation that requires informed consent for treatment. You always want to make sure your client is informed of what modalities, searching for the word here, what modalities are going to be used on them in that specific session, and you always stick to that. You never use a modality that you haven't discussed with your client and that your client has not agreed to. It gives another case study for you to go over, and then we go on to enforcement and consequences. So laws specify who oversees the enforcement and consequences of violations. When a criminal act is committed, gives the example, law enforcement agencies are directly involved with arresting suspects and pressing charges. A trial and possible sentence may follow. If regulatory law is violated, the state board accepts a complaint, holds a hearing, and makes its determination. If the therapist is found at fault, the law or the rules and regulations provide the board with enforcement guidelines. It gives the example, a therapist performs a technique not within his or her scope of practice. The client could file a complaint with the state board. Following the rules and regulations, the board would then determine what action to take against the therapist, and the actions could include a letter of reprimand or suspension or revocation of the therapist's license to practice. Our next topic is civil law. This is another type of law governing people's behavior. In a lawsuit, one party feels that he or she has been harmed in some way by another party. They may not have been clear violation of a law or regulation, but the person could still be harmed. Rules and laws address as many issues as possible, but there's certainly gaps that allow for civil actions to take place. An ethical behavior may be involved. In civil law, one party, called the plaintiff, seeking damages or restitution, one party, called the plaintiff, files suit against another party, called the defendant, seeking damages or restitution. And then it goes into the example, the client may feel a therapist has injured him or her in some way during the session, causing pain and suffering. If the client feels the therapist caused this injury, the client may seek financial damages from the therapist. This is why we keep our malpractice insurance. Civil laws. In civil cases, law enforcement agencies and the state board may not be involved. Instead, both parties are represented by lawyers. The case may end with an out-of-court settlement, or parties may go to the court to settle their differences. If so, a judge or jury weighs the argument and makes the decision. In reality, anyone can file a lawsuit against anyone else at almost any time. Being sued does not mean you're guilty of anything, nor does a lawsuit automatically lead to a penalty. The legal system is set to protect innocent as well as to provide compensation for injured. If you practice massage therapy as you have been trained, and you stay within your scope of practice, you should not be afraid of lawsuits. Key points here. Rules and regulations define areas of the law. Rules and regulations clarify the practical specifics of the law. And rules and regulations provide guidelines for both therapists and the public. Okay, so, well, we're not quite to that PowerPoint yet. Okay, so we'll back up one. Okay, specific legal issues. We're on page 37 now, the bottom half. Okay, so we got scope of practice. The scope of practice for massage therapists can be defined by a state law, a professional association, or by local ordinances. The scope states what a therapist can or cannot do while practicing massage therapy. These parameters help the therapist understand what the public expects from massage and, more importantly, states the boundaries for the therapist. Gives the example of state law may include the scope of practice that a therapist can use certain mechanical devices. The scope of practice can vary somewhat between state law and professional association. Although they may be very similar in many ways, therapists must be aware of any differences and must practice under the definition enforced by state law. It's important, therefore, to read and understand your state's scope of practice regulations. And you can find that. You can go to the Alabama Massage Therapy Board. It's ALMTDB, I believe, .gov. But you can do a Google search for Alabama Massage Therapy Board. There they have a list where you can click on and pull up these regulations or rules and recs, and that will give you the thing. And there's also one laws that you can pull up on, and it will give you a detailed description of everything. Okay, so specific legal issues. We talked about scope of practice. Next up, malpractice insurance is mandatory by the state of Alabama. But this is basically it's a type of insurance for professionals. It pays the damages if a professional is sued by a client and the client wins. Medical malpractice lawsuits are often in the news, and most medical professionals purchase malpractice insurance. Again, it's mandatory by the state of Alabama. They're generally expensive because lawsuits are common. However, in massage therapy, there's not very many lawsuits, and our premiums are lower. And again, I believe it's from $105 to $265 as far as cost-wise for us. Contracts. Massage therapists enter into contracts with employers, employees, clients, landlords, insurance companies, other businesses, depending on the type of practice. For example, therapists working in a spa may have a contract with the spa that spells out the expectations for both parties. In many situations, only a verbal agreement takes place between the two parties. Make sure you get it in writing. Do not go by a verbal agreement. That will not withstand in court. A contract is a legal document, and as a general rule, it's good to seek legal advice before signing any contract. If someone pushes you to sign a contract, such as an employment contract, do not be intimidated to sign without reading the document. Read every word of it. Thoroughly read the entire contract and have someone else help you determine if the contract is fair before signing. Specific elements within laws. State laws may include a great variety of specific legal issues. When you're preparing to become licensed or to practice in an area, obtain copies of laws, rules, regulations, and ordinances pertaining to your practice. And again, I've already told you to do that, but just reinforcing that, I want you to go to the city ordinances and also to the state of Alabama and to the Alabama Massage Therapy Board and pull all of those files and have them on hand. Many therapists are surprised to discover how many details are contained within these documents. A state law may address client confidentiality, for example, or issues such as employer liability and responsibilities. Do HIPAA regulations referring to the client records apply in the state? Yes. And HIPAA is Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Make sure, which you'll have a specific section that we will do on HIPAA in its entirety. Laws and regulations do not apply only to those who run their own business. It also applies if you're working in someone else's business. If you work in an office with a chiropractor, you're not exempt from the laws and ordinances within your area. Being informed and educated about the law is all part of being professional. So the importance of being in the know. finally, we get to move PowerPoints. Excuse me. So when you decided to begin your career as a massage therapist or body worker, you took on the responsibility of learning how to practice appropriately. This involves not only being well trained in techniques, but also knowing the expectations of the governing bodies. Again, I didn't know is not a legal defense and is not an excuse that any professional should ever use. Both the general public and those who enforce the law expect you to know the laws that apply to your practice. So know your state and local regulations and laws. Not knowing is not an excuse. And always research and ask questions. So do exercise 4.2 and also read the case study there. And we will continue on page 39. It's the responsibility of the massage therapist to become educated in legal matters and understand what laws, rules, regulations, and ordinances apply to them. It is also important not to interpret any laws, rules, regulations on your own. When in doubt, ask people in charge. Never hesitate to pick up the phone, call the Alabama State Board, and ask them questions. I've been in this over 14 years, and I still pick up the phone and call them if I'm not sure. Anything I'm unclear on, I always call. They're always very kind. They're always very considerate and always very professional. And if they don't know the answer, they will put you in contact with a member of the board that does know the answer. So key points: know your state and local regulations and laws. Not knowing is not an excuse. Research and ask questions. Okay, additional activities down at the bottom of page 40. After you and your classmates have a sense of what laws and rules apply to massage therapy practice in your area, have a class discussion to answer these questions. Obviously, again, we're doing this as an online part of the portion of the, I can't even talk. The ethics class is an online portion of the course material required, so it does limit a little bit here, but get with other students and discuss these, and also send in, along with your exercises, the your answers to each of these questions as well. And that's it for this section, and we'll pick up next time with chapter 5 on boundaries. But I believe we have key terms. Yes. Key terms. Laws are rules established and enforced by governing bodies that protect and restrict all parties involved. Regulations are rules of conduct usually associated with laws involving expansion or explanation of those laws. Ordinances are rules and regulations usually established at the local level. Criminal law is a system of law regarding actions that are harmful to the public, whereas civil law involves a system of law involving relationships or disputes between two parties. And you are responsible for sending in each of those definitions. Also, I recommend doing flashcards to help you study for when you get ready to do your MBLEX, when you start your studying for it. And also, I just go back from time to time through my flashcards, and I actually still have some of my flashcards that I made from when I was in massage school and I was studying sorry, I didn't take MBLEX. I took the national board. Now you have the option, well, now you can only take MBLEX, and then after MBLEX you can take the national board. But I still have some of my cards from when I was studying. So those are things that you'll want to maintain and keep up with. Not necessarily every one of them, but a lot of them you'll still refer back to from time to time throughout your career. Okay, and next we'll talk about boundaries.